families don't look the way that they have decades ago. It ends up falling on one person who ends up being the default communicator, the default scheduler, the default person for all of that stuff. And the problem is that once it funnels down into that one person, it's really hard to open the funnel back up. You don't want to be in a space where you are unable to speak for yourself and the world happens to you.
What are their options and how would you guide them? Welcome to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. If you ever asked, how do I protect myself and those I love if something unexpected happened to me? You're in the right place. I'm your host, Niki Weiss, and together we'll explore how to protect yourself in a world where both your physical and digital legacy leave a lasting impact. And welcome back to another episode of the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. And I am pleased to invite Dr. Ashley Blackington. And Ashley, you and I met. We are part of a death tech collaborative, or collective, I think they're calling the group, where we are innovative death tech founders. And I was super thrilled to learn more about Dovetail and the projects that you're doing. So welcome to the show, and tell us what got you on this journey today.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's one of those things that, like, on my bingo card of life, I never thought I'd be thrilled to talk about death, but here we are, and it's part of the journey. So, yes, the short version of my story is I was an OT clinically practicing for a very long
OT,
time.
just so people know, so occupational, that's like the buzzword, right? Occupational therapist.
Yes. So occupational therapist working in inpatient settings. And then I transitioned to starting a private practice. And that was when I was really face to face with these conversations around the end of life experience and how families navigate that. And in that journey, I was helping people with aging in place. That was the focus of the practice, was aging in place, and families that had questions around, how do I support my loved one in this end of life kind of process, not necessarily the actual death and dying part, but as they got older, they had different physical abilities, they had different cognitive abilities, all of that stuff. And so families were trying to figure out how to navigate that. And what I thought was going to be go into people's houses and say, here's the equipment that you need, and here is how you set up the environment, and have this really environmental focus. Actually, the vast majority of the work that I did was done sitting at the kitchen table with these people, bringing up these conversations around how their later years of their life were going to progress, how the person who was going to end up receiving care they were thinking about what their end of life journey was going to be, how families were thinking about what their involvement could be, and that's a complicated situation, especially nowadays, cost of living and all of those pieces, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But it was, how do we start these conversations, because nobody wants to have these conversations, but we need to have these conversations. And the earlier we have these conversations, the less, I call it sharpness around it, the less it feels like you're a really bad sunburn or,
Stinging.
ripping the Band-Aid off. Yeah. And so that became the majority of the work that I did, was just helping people come together and start this conversation to say, where are you comfortable? Where are you comfortable? And how do we think about this so that the plan is much more collaborative and less of an emergency, a phone call. Like, that definitely happens. You get the phone call from the ER, but really trying to plan this out and think ahead of that piece. And then that ultimately led to, through a few things, the development of Dovetail, which is a platform for family caregivers to be able to coordinate care, to be able to communicate and collaborate. And it's really focused on the family caregivers coming together as a unit and being able to support that care recipient.
And Dovetail, it's a platform solution. So it's an app and also, online solution for families specifically to do that coordination, because there is a lot to coordinate. People don't realize that it just doesn't happen magically. And I also think that some people think that the healthcare system is going to do that management of care. And that's not the case.
Yes.
And less and less.
No. Yeah, less and less. It is the thing that I wish that people knew was that the right now there are a lot of silos of systems that exist, and everyone is really good-ish at their system, right? So an emergency room is really great at emergency room medicine and emergency room case management and those things. Inpatient is really good at all of that in the bubble. But the and rehab and home care and all of that stuff. But the transition between these two is still so disjointed that that's where it tends to funnel down to one person who ends up being the default communicator, the default scheduler, the default person for all of that stuff. And the problem is that once it funnels down into that one person, it's really hard to open the funnel back up. So it could be that from the emergency room home, it ends up falling on one person. It could be emergency room to inpatient, all of that stuff, all of those steps along the way. At some point it's going to funnel down to one, and it's really, really, really difficult to open it back up again, because it's always easier if one person does it. One person knows the answers. This person is the point person, because there's no way for a healthcare system, to interact with a group of people in a way that meets the needs of the individuals as the caregivers, but also it protects the privacy of the care recipient, because that's so much of what the barriers are in healthcare communication is around privacy, for good reason, for sure.
And as you were sharing, I was thinking of three different scenarios that people are really facing when it comes to that care coordination, right? So if you're saying it's that one person, so identify that one person, right? So if there's a family situation where there's multiple children, right? Or talk about family dynamics, and we can and the statistically, it is usually the eldest daughter who is
Mhm.
carrying that burden. Oh, and by the way, she also has multiple children and a full-time job and and both, as your podcast is.
Yep.
So that's scenario one, right? Is like, and then she now not just has to manage the care of her parents, but now the communication between all the siblings and the craziness that goes on there. Scenario two is maybe there's only one child or one person, right? Maybe it's the spouse or the partner, and then they feel all the burden and they have nobody to reach out to. And then scenario three, which really would love to talk about, is what about these solo agers, right? These people
Mhm.
that who they have to lean on professionals, bringing in home health care aides, and they themselves have to do it. So here we are in this modern age of like, why is this so complicated now? I mean, 30, 40
Yeah.
years ago, was it really that complicated? And what's changed?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the major change that we sort of skip over a lot, it's talked about, but we sort of don't really connect it, is that people are living longer. So
Dying longer.
because of
Sorry.
how
We're living longer
yes,
and we're dying
living and
longer.
dying longer. Yes, exactly. So people are being diagnosed earlier, right? We have better systems and better testing and diagnostics to be able to identify disease or illness, right? So people are finding out earlier. They're entering into treatment earlier. They're going on to prescription medications earlier, and they're living longer, which is great, because we want to have a longer quality of life. We want to be able to know things about ourselves and be able to plan out and all of those pieces. So we're living longer. But because we're living longer, we're also living longer with more chronic illnesses that are able to progress later, right? So that's a big problem on the individual part, is that yes, it is great, but we also have a stack of comorbidities typically that happen in the later stages of life. Second is that families are tend to be smaller than they used to be. 30, especially 30, 40 years ago, families are smaller, families are more spread out. So even if you are someone who has four kids, they can live all over the
A
country,
world.
and it's really hard.
Yeah.
Or world, yeah. So it's really hard if you've you grew up in a time when parents lived down the street from kids, or they lived in the next town over, and you could pop in and check on them. Now you're talking about what you're saying, like having to have different types of people involved in your care team because your kids may live far away, your spouse may have already passed. And how do we make a care team for ourselves that may be a combination of family and professional? And how do we do it in a way that is different because every single family system is going to be different versus how it was 30, 40 years ago? It was, this is the person who's going to take over, and this is the person who's going to make the decisions, and everyone this, and this. And then there's also the rise of that typical oldest daughter, who is also managing their own
Family.
family and their own life. That is like, this is not a reasonable expectation, and we need to find something that is different. And so how do we work towards not having everything automatically default to one person?
And where do you feel like the inspiration of Dovetail came in, and how to support people with your platform?
Yeah, I think for me, the idea is exactly that families don't look the way that they have decades ago. There are people who their best friend lives down the street, or they've had a neighbor that they go and get coffee with every Thursday forever and ever, and they have a really deep connection with them, and these people care about each other, and they say, I want to help and I want to do all of this stuff. Their kids may live elsewhere. And so how do you have that person come into the fold and be able to communicate around that? I think that one of the big misconceptions around caregiving is that it has to be this sort of all in. Like if you say I'm a caregiver, you've got to be all in on like all the medical and all of the appointments and all of everything. But what I really think happens now is that we have different levels and layers of caregivers, but there's no way for that to be effectively represented in communication platforms that are available on the market. So if you are someone who lives alone and you have a dog and you are going to dialysis and you need someone to walk your dog on the days that you have dialysis, and your friend says, "Yes, I would love to help you do that," and they know your dog and they live down the street, there needs to be a way for them to have communication, right? And that person can communicate with a sibling or with people who are getting a ride. If dialysis runs late, can someone feed your dog? It's all these different layers. So that person who's walking your dog doesn't need to know your entire medical
Right.
history. They need to just know these details. And so that's the inspiration for Dovetail, is for it to be a way to set up layers of caregiving so that people know the details they need to know, but also a way for it to flow across these different levels so that there is actual collaborative care and effective communication.
I mean, people really are being challenged right now with the channels of communication. They're being challenged by the
Hmm.
channels, the number of challenge of communication, and how to kind of streamline the communication in order that decisions and details are not falling through the cracks. And
Yeah.
it's emotional. I mean, it's emotional to have these
Mhm.
conversations. So you mentioned privacy. Can you expand more about your experience working with the privacy piece?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of fear. So in the private practice, having people come in, there's a lot of fear around autonomy and of loss of autonomy, and that is also coupled with a loss of privacy, right? If I'm someone who is aging and my kids are here and I say, I really need help with the groceries. But my concern is that if I say I need help with groceries, all of a sudden I'm going to lose the keys to my car. I'm going to lose my bank accounts. I'm going to lose all of this stuff because we don't have a continuum of this conversation. It's usually delayed so much that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy for people. So there's that piece of we hold on to our stuff for so long that it ends up being the thing that gets us in the end. It ends up being someone now has to come into our house, and if there's a fall, someone has to come into our house and put grab bars in. We don't get to pick those grab bars. We don't get to decide where things go, what they look like. So if you go into the hospital, someone has come into your space, your home, and
Oh,
they've
they're
adjusted things, they've
they're
put
looking at your
things.
stuff. And I just want to
They're looking at
they're
your
looking
stuff.
they're in your stuff. Especially if you were a
Mhm.
private person and now all of a sudden you have to open up doors. And I do want to acknowledge, you've mentioned about elderly people, and for some people they know that my family currently is going through with my son-in-law, that he has a terminal diagnosis with brain cancer. And so it's not, those 60, 70, 80 year olds. We could be dealing with
Mhm.
this end of life experience at a very much younger age. It's more that incapacitation. And how do
Mhm.
caregivers support, no matter how old a person is? Look, you've got children that are special needs. And as a caregiver, just imagine, right, that they've got a special needs child and they have to work and a family and they have aging parents. Like, it's just too much
Mhm.
for people.
It's so layered, it's so
Layered.
complicated, and I think that, like, as you were talking about the communication piece, just that all in itself, like, I've seen people come in with a 2-inch binder with everything printed out because the person that goes into the hospital is the person who brings the binder, and then the binder goes to the next person. And it's just seeing that, you know, uh, being a clinician on the team who hands instructions, who hands recommendations, who hands information to someone who's standing there going, I don't know how I'm going to make this happen. I don't, I, you know, they I don't know what I'm gonna do because I also have kids and I have a job, or, I've been doing this for 20 years. Talk about someone that's been doing this for a very long time. I've been doing this for so long, and every time we come into the hospital, I just get more stuff to do and I am just completely
So I
toast.
also want to call the elephant in the room, which you're bringing up, which is I have seen where the caregiver ends up being sick or dying before the
Yes.
patient because of the
Mhm.
stress.
Mhm. Yeah. Oh, I've seen it. I've seen it. I don't even know
Yeah.
how many
I mean,
times,
this is people aren't
and
talking
we
about this
have,
one.
yeah, we have, one of the things that we used to do, or that I used to do, I can't speak for anyone else, but what I used to do is when somebody comes in an inpatient setting and you talk to them, and you get a view of their medical history as a provider, and you go in and you talk to them and you see the caregiver who's with them. This is the person that is there before you in the morning. This is the person who is helping them eat dinner when you are leaving the hospital at night to go home to end your day. This is the person that is in and out all day long, and this person is uh coupled with the person that they are providing care for, whether it's a romantic relationship, a partner, whatever. This person is attached, and because this person is attached and they continuously pour out into that, there is very, very little opportunity for them to take care of themselves. And so, one of the things that I used to do, is I would say when they're in the hospital, we have them here. There's 24-hour care here. There are nurses. They're going to be in therapy all day. They have a provider here. There are people in the hospital to help them. I know that you want to be with them. I know that you want to be here. Take this opportunity to go do the things that you need to do for yourself. Take the opportunity to go run the 3, 4, 20 errands that have been sitting at the top of your mind that run like a ticker tape, but you don't feel like you can go because if you go, something will happen. Some people take you up on it, and some people say, oh, no, no, no. But I think that it's really important, like you said, I think it's really important to call that out, that especially if you're in a caregiving situation where you don't have respite in the day to day and someone is in a facility for whatever reason, you need to take that time, as much time as you can get. I've also seen people that have come in from knee surgeries, hip surgeries, back surgeries, because they have physical injury from transferring somebody to provide care for any sort of thing related to
Wear and
caregiving.
tear.
And so now they
It's wear
are,
and tear on the
yeah, wear and
body,
tear.
for, like you said, if you've
It's
got a caregiver who's been taking care of end stage dementia, or, an Alzheimer's
Yeah.
spouse who's been at it.
Yeah. It's wear and tear, but it's also wear and tear on top of a lack of education for caregivers on how to effectively do the things that they are doing. This is another thing that does not get called out as often as it should. There is very minimal education for caregivers on caregiving tasks, and then the complexity and the expectation of tasks for caregivers to perform with little to no education is increasing because our hospital systems are not um, are overwhelmed. Are We cannot keep people because of insurance, because of all sorts of things. That's a whole other podcast in itself. But people can't stay in the hospital and in different levels for as long as sometimes they need to, and so things are getting handed off to family members to take over. Ostomy changes, catheter changes, home dialysis, IV flushes, all of these things. And yes, home care will do some education, but these are nursing tasks, and people are not getting the background and anything really comprehensive. It's really just trying to teach someone because we have to keep things moving along. And I think that is not an empowered position for a caregiver to be in, to feel like you have a lot of responsibility and you don't have a lot of training or a lot of opportunity to reach out and ask questions for people.
So we've identified the problem and we know how we got here. The question is, what does the future hold? And it's interesting, I'm starting to see, especially in the death tech space and robotics, and how is technology going to be able to allow individuals not just to age in place, because that is a goal. I look at my husband and I, and that's, long-term care is not an, long-term care insurance is not an option for us. And with the legislation that's coming out and the cuts in Medicare and Medicaid, like, I think about it. I think about, oh my God, my husband's 64 years old. If he had a stroke tomorrow and needed long-term care, I mean, even myself as a planner, it is the thought of, I have my adult children I'm trying to take care of. I have grandchildren. I have a business. And now if that was thrown in the mix, so with
Hmm.
technology, how do you see,
Hmm.
if not tomorrow, at least in our lifetime, can that support us in this aging in place quality? Because we need more. It's about the quality, not the quantity,
Yeah.
right? We don't need to necessarily
Yeah.
live longer. We need to live better.
Exactly. I think that, yes, I think that technology is an essential component of this. I mean, not just because I have a tech-based company, but I think that it's essential because one thing that we haven't talked about is the fact that our population is aging rapidly. And there are the caregiver ratio by 2030 or by 2050 is down to 1 to 3. Currently it's 1 to 7. We can't make more people, right? Like we can't dolly the sheep caregivers to make up for that, the population difference, and the caregiver population difference. So the way that we're going to actually help people in terms of caregiver quality of life, care recipient quality of life, all of those factors, is to help the people that are providing care become more efficient. And to me, that looks like less time spent on communication in terms of checking all these different channels: email, text message, group chat, but 2-inch binder full of printed things. How do we streamline all of that so that we're able to quickly identify who can help with care, who in all different levels that we need, and how we can then, using that streamlined approach, create more opportunity for caregivers to be able to take care of themselves. That's part of it. That's a huge part of it, as we've talked about, is we have to make space for caregivers to be able to fill their own bucket, to be able to recharge, to be able to go to their preventative screening appointments, go for their annual blood work, have an opportunity to go to the dentist, to go, I don't know, spend an hour staring at a wall. It doesn't actually have to be time in service of something else, but time that is spent for them to actually fully, not even fully, but attempt in bits and pieces, however they can make it happen, to recharge and reset themselves. Because the fact of the matter is, based on how our population is aging, the number of people who are coming up behind, the fact that people are now starting to caregive at younger ages. The average age of a caregiver used to be 45, and now it's like it's trending down. Like we're down into the 30s now, I believe, high
Are you
30s.
talking about professional
Um,
caregivers or
no,
family
family
caregivers?
caregivers.
Well, we also
Yeah.
need to acknowledge that if you're talking about family caregivers, so the children of the person who needs to be cared for, people are having children later in life, right? So if you're having
Yeah.
your kids in your 40s, late 30s, early 40s, yeah, that may, and now you're in your 70s, yeah,
Hmm.
they're going to be younger. And because they're younger, they themselves are still trying to establish their careers, their families, their identity. And so the emotional stress, the identity, and now the Filili laws, right? I mean, I'm thinking about if people aren't familiar with the Filili responsibility laws, right? Am I going to have to take care of a parent that I really am estranged from? And what does
Yeah.
that mean? Sorry, I opened up a can of
Hmm.
worms there. That's another podcast I probably have to jump into, but um, yeah, I mean, they're younger, and as they're
Hmm.
younger, they're less established. So it's like a house of
Yeah.
cards.
It is. We're definitely like we're in this moment, I feel like, of massive transitions from the way things used to be and these established expectations to what is actually possible. It is not possible to be a 40-hour a week caregiver if you are in your early 30s and you have young kids and you have a career and you have an outsized mortgage and you have to be the one to carry the benefits for your family. All of these things. We're in the I wish we were in the eye of the storm, but we're not. We're still
Turmoil.
like mid swirl in all of this. And I think that we continue to, because we are in this sort of not panic state, but because we are in this, oh my gosh, there's no right way forward, there's no path, that I'm trying to look at this from a 30,000-foot view and say, while I cannot, affect change for this person, this person directly right now in this moment, how do we create a system so that caregivers now and the ones that are coming into the fold are able to jump in quickly or start from a place of collaboration and communication so that they can navigate this in a way that feels much more empowered and supported than what's currently out there, because it's the Wild West right
I,
now.
I mean, let's call it. I feel like we need to repeat that if you're listening to this conversation and you're feeling the overwhelm, we're here to say, yeah, it's real.
Hmm.
This is not the way it used to be. The pressures are, I love the way you said, layered. The complexity just keeps layering on top of, and some of these layers are not identifiable. The nuances are new, and so it's hard. The edges are not clear. So if we can't
Hmm.
call out what the problem really is, right? That a 30-year-old who's trying to establish themselves now has to take care of their 65-year-old parent because they don't have the finances, they don't have the health care. This is a real situation. What the solution is, I think both you and I are passionate about. We just need to have these conversations. Start
Hmm.
the conversation. Start them early. Start them before the chaos starts. Hey, mom, dad, if your parents are over 60, this is a kitchen table. We need to have this conversation.
Yeah, and I think that that's the really an important takeaway, is that you're not even teeing up the conversation of like, where do you want all of your stuff to go. You're saying, hey, if something happens, what do you what do
What's
you
the
want?
plan?
Who do you want in here? Who do you not want in here? That's, I think, even more important. Who do you not want to be a part of this? Because sometimes it's, Aunt so and so or Uncle so and so who's like, "Oh, I'll help." And this person is like, "I cannot. I don't want them in my space. I don't feel
Mhm.
comfortable." But if that's the person who's like retired and has nothing to do and, all of this steps in, you have to have a conversation ahead of that. Like if everyone's standing around going, "I know Uncle so and so is going to come down the pipe and be like, I'm here. I've got it. No problem." Meanwhile, that person is like your sibling and they drive you completely nuts. And they're going to drop the ball and okay, how do we come up with a plan that makes it so that, yes, this person can be a part of the team, but they don't necessarily need to be the team captain. They can be someone who helps in a way that works for the recipient and Uncle so and so, but that we're not all, it's just not a swirl of chaos. And that only, like you said, that only happens the earlier we start this conversation.
So, can you give some advice to people who are solo agers, who don't have their traditional family unit? You know, that they've lived a
Mhm.
life, a well-lived life, but they've also made choices to live independently, but now they've reached a point where they need caregiving. What are their options, and how would you guide them?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that on the solo aging front, it shortens that time period where you can say like, "Oh, I've got this." I think that if you are someone who has made the decisions that you have and you are now in a spot where you are you and you are moving through the aging process, you have to start earlier. You have to think about, okay, if something were to happen, who would I call? Who is your emergency contact? Oftentimes, I think that a lot of people that are in this solo, independent, yada yada, like, when was the last time you updated your emergency contact?
Yeah,
Where is that
or
person
they
in your
might need
life?
to put money down. I mean, they might need to put money down and their
Hmm.
name on a list to get into a community, right? A facility, a community, a
Yeah.
step down unit where they have, and you might need to go into independent living sooner than expected to ensure that when the time comes that you have a space for a step down unit to make sure that you have that professional care in place.
Yeah, you've got to put yourself on the radar of a system that is not managed by you. So you've got to do the research. You've got to, like you said, you've got to get yourself on a list. You've got to decide, okay, at what point do I need to transition to another space? Because the reality is, unless you are pretty wealthy, and yeah, that requirement is only increasing as we have less paid caregiving coming into the workforce. We have more demand on paid caregiving services that are already established. You've got to do a lot of pre-planning, which means that you really have to face these decisions a lot earlier than you may want to. And then also too, like, I don't think that that has to be a like, oh well, I guess I have to do this because whatever. I want people to feel empowered by this, because especially if you are someone who is solo aging, you don't want to be in a space where you are unable to speak for yourself and the world happens to you. You want to be the person who has made your wishes clear. You have you've got things in writing. You've got plans in place
They've
in
got a final
terms of
playbook,
what your transition is.
dealing
A
with final
final
playbook,
playbook.
dealing with a
Mhm.
capacitation, right? Incapacitation is like it's a thing. It needs to be
Yeah.
planned for. You need to set up your
Mhm.
caregivers. You need to identify it. No, you and I are all about the conversation, and I mean, appreciate the time that we spent today. And so, for
Mhm.
takeaways, if someone, if this was an eye-opening, aha, I really need to start thinking about it. What is your recommended takeaways for our listeners?
I think that thinking about, if you are someone who, if you find yourself in the oldest daughter position and you've sort of always assumed this is going to be me, it's all going to land on my lap, I would recommend thinking about this conversation, starting this conversation earlier. I would recommend thinking about who you can bring into the fold so that this does not automatically funnel to you. I don't think that there's this predetermined destiny when it comes to caregiving. I think that if we are open and honest and we run out ahead of things, that we're going to be in a different spot than if we just keep going with, I guess this is just your problem. So I would suggest that people start these conversations. It's really hard to be the person to bring it up. Parents don't want to bring it up because they don't want to address the fact that this is something that they are going to eventually need, and kids don't want to bring it up because they don't want to address the fact that their parents are going to eventually need that. But unfortunately, nobody gets out of life alive. And the sooner we start this, the softer it feels, or the more, not attenuation, but the more acceptance that we have around this, and the less abyss like it feels like to be in that space. And so that's what I would recommend: early, often. Don't assume that someone else is gonna just step in and take it all. I think that for family members who are gonna provide care, having established conversations around what level of involvement and what level of interaction and what level of care and support you're going to be able to provide now and in the future is really important, because then it's not like everyone plays the not it game um towards the end of life. And then I think also having those earlier conversations gives the care recipient the opportunity to say, this is what I would like, and for them to feel like they are a part of the decisions that are getting made, not just all of a sudden everyone steps in and decides for them.
And the word that's been like burning in my head as you're talking is, I think we need to in order to accomplish what you just put on the table, we need to look at privacy in a different way.
Yeah.
Because these conversations won't have if you don't open up and share what your wishes are, where things are, how you want things to be buttoned up in the end, right? I mean, especially now with, the death with dignity laws and the cost of long-term care, like these are going to be important conversations that have to happen, and privacy really needs to be redefined.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Yeah, I think if we stop looking at privacy as like a Fort Knox situation, like that we have much more segmented view of it. We can talk about like it is in estate planning, right? You have healthcare information and you have financial information and you have power of attorney and stuff like that. Address it that way. You don't want to talk about money? That's fine. You don't have to start off the conversation talking about money. Eventually, you probably are going to have to talk about it, but maybe you want to talk about like your wishes, and maybe you want to talk about whatever it is, however you're comfortable with it, but break it up. You're not just saying like, let me open up my underwear drawer and let's talk about all the things.
Oh, that's awesome. And with that note, we can, open up that, underwear drawer conversation. I mean, it really is, but when it comes to the very, very end, you have no choice. There are no more drawers. Everything is out in the open. And I think that's a conversation that we just need people. This is the aha moment. This is the next level of adulting that people really just need to embrace it. Well, Ashley, thank you so much. I'm really, your app, Dovetail, the benefits of it for our listeners, for people to really explore that there are tools out there that are being developed, like the one that you've been able to share with us. I hope people will take the moment and take a look at it. And where can they find you? Best place to find you?
Yes. So you can find me actually ashleyBlackington.com. It's my name. I can't pronounce it. That's my website. It has everything there. It has Dovetail. It has the podcast information. It has Home Field Advantage, which is the private consulting work that I do for people to have conversations around this aging, progression, care, all of that. So all of that information is there. Dovetaildesigns.co is the website specifically for the app. It's available on iOS and Android. It is coming soon to desktop. And then Ashley Blackington at LinkedIn. That's really where I'm the most active. So if you have questions, feel free to reach out. Happy to meet. And I do like a 15-minute consult for people not sure if they need help in these conversation pieces. So that's also available through the Ashley Blackington website.
And with that, thank you so much for joining, and we'll end our conversation here. Until next time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. I hope this conversation inspired you to take control and plan for the inevitable to protect yourself and those you leave behind. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter at digitallegacypodcast.com. Remember, life is full of surprises. What happens after you die shouldn't be. So keep your passwords safe and your playbook up to date.